Well, hello everyone. This is the last module of the course, and so you've made it. Congratulations. What I want to do today is to just tell you a little bit about the content of this week's module, which is not that much, actually. And the reason, there's several reasons. One of them is that it's not actually a full module. It's classes end at the beginning of next week. And so it's a shortened module because of that. The other reason is that you have a paper due, and I would rather that you focus your attention on that and also on the final exam, which will be coming next week, than doing a lot of extra stuff. And so the only reading I've given you is a reading of my own, the first chapter of a book that I have coming out. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because it kind of tries to wrap up a lot of what we've done in this course. You know, I don't actually assign my own work all that much in my classes, and you might think you find that surprising in this course because you've already read several things from me at the beginning of the course. But that's pretty unusual. Most other courses I really don't, have my own stuff involved. But this one, it felt like I really had to include some of my own work, and part of the reason for that is that what I've been trying to do throughout this course is to, yes, teach you about African philosophy, but also teach you about philosophy. Also help you think through what it means to do philosophy. You know, one of the reasons I've been interested in African philosophy is that I think it's such a great place, such a great site to think about what it means to be a philosopher as such. And part of the reason for that is that, as we've seen all along, African philosophers are doing exactly that. They are thinking through what does it mean to be a philosopher, especially when the Western establishment of philosophy has largely disregarded your work and your perspective as being important at all, as long as for the last several hundred years, certainly throughout the history of colonialism, philosophy has been whatever European countries brought into Africa and put in place in the universities. And so whatever indigenous thought was going to arise there was not exactly encouraged. Was not exactly part of the cultural infrastructure, given how dominant the colonial structures were in Africa. And so thinking about what it means to be a philosopher in that space, in that life experience, I think is really important for Africans, but also instructive for everyone else. And so I've structured this course to really try and capture some of that. You may recall how we started this course off. The first module was doing philosophy as if the world exists. And I talked about philosophy in place and the ways in which philosophy can attend to its places. We talked, the kind of classic question, what is African philosophy? But we tried to get into that question by asking a bunch of questions. And again, I had a reading of my own called African Philosophy, to try and get at that. We started off with a kind of seemingly simple, but maybe not so simple question: where is Africa? And so thought about what it means for Africa to be a place and to be dismissed as a place, but then also conceive of itself as a place and on its own terms. And so we looked at a number of things in that connection. Classic questions of identity. Who is African? These are questions that I didn't exactly expect any of us to answer. Most Africans I know, they will have a position on these things, but it's a live question, right? And so, there are very good reasons for specific kinds of positions that people may have, especially given the history of colonialism. To try and develop an indigenous thought that is in some sense free of those colonial influences, free of those influences of European powers, European languages, European thought systems, and it's in its own terms. What does that look like? Does that mean jettisoning everything that might have some level of origin elsewhere. How much of an origin does something have to have in order for it to be not relevant or not applicable to real African philosophy, whatever we mean by that. We looked at African philosophy and method. If we're going to talk about philosophy, how do we go about doing that? We talked about what I called existential threats and responses. If you're going to do African philosophy, you have to take on head on the realities of colonialism, slavery, apartheid, and other kinds of things that have governed, structured, done damage to the ability of Africans to articulate a philosophy that's relevant to their own place. We looked at metaphysics, and we looked at a number of kind of common or classic sorts of concepts that appear over and over again in philosophical systems and philosophical work in Africa. We looked at epistemological questions, and there are quite a few of those in the text that I had you read. So what does it mean to know? And what does it mean to know against a backdrop of claims to knowledge that may work somewhere else, but may have a difficult history within Africa. We looked at ethics, and tied to that, we looked at gender, sexuality, and identity as ethical questions within Africa as well. We looked at politics and social organization, and questions of the future. And so in that connection, divination, negritude, Afrofuturism, and so forth. And then finally, last module, we looked at the arts. And I hope you can see that, there is a lot more we could have done. This is a quick trip through questions within African philosophy, and especially now there is an absolute ton of research and work that's coming out by African philosophers from all over the continent and from the diaspora as well. And so, this is meant to be an introduction, but it's meant to be an introduction in another sense as well. As I said at the beginning, African philosophy has something to say to us about doing philosophy at all. And so that's why I gave you the chapter to read that I did, which is the first chapter of this book. What I'm trying to do in that chapter is to think about how we can have a philosophy that looks towards a future, that builds towards a future. I use the term becoming African, and that's not to say that someone or something is not currently African, but becoming African is always about a sense of emergence, a sense of changing into something, not being settled in something, not just simply being defined, as it were, a static being of some sort. And so the version of philosophy that I'm trying to get you to think about is the version of philosophy that is very much about reaching forward, reaching to new possibilities. I want to make the claim that that is one of the things that we find at the core of philosophy, and we find it echoed in many different traditions. We can find it in Western philosophy. We can find it in ancient philosophy. We can find it in Chinese philosophy. We can find it in indigenous philosophy, and we can certainly find it in African philosophy. And in that last case, that's the point of the book that I that this is an introduction to try and show how it's already there within African philosophy, and kind of some of the kind of classic works, some of which we've already seen in this course. So in this book I look at John Mbidi's notion of time, which we thought about, and make the case that Mbidi is doing something perhaps more interesting than it seems on the surface. It looks like he's telling us just, well, here's how Africans think about time, or here's how Africans experience time. And in fact, what I think he's doing is telling us something about how Africans operate within time, how time is what I'll call temporality. In other words, how we experience time and how that experience can lead us to think about the future, make decisions, look forward. And the case I make there is that Mbidi's notion of time, is really lays the groundwork for, an approach to time that's very much about acting and then reflecting, looking a little bit into the future, not vastly into the future, not, let's build something for 100 years from now, but let's look, let's assess, let's think, let's act, back and forth and back and forth. And what I want to argue is that this kind of dovetails very nicely with a communal orientation towards ethics, towards the future. It's not just the great person, the great man, the great whoever, thinking a great thought, and bending the world to his will and then creating something that's going to endure through the ages. It is about a community coming together, thinking about what its future should look like, and working towards that. And so my case is that there is something that looks much more amenable to an age that, for example, realizes that there are such things as climate change that we have to deal with, environmental degradation, all sorts of questions that cannot be solved just by individuals being the great man, thinking up the great invention, the great thought that just will save us all. These things have to be done together. These things have to be done bit by bit, with an imagination about the future that's going to change over time. And so that's just one example. I think Mbidi, it turns out to be a lot more interesting than we might think about in African philosophy, which is, here's an African, here's a theory of time. There it is. It's different from, many Western theories of time. And now we have this. Here's the African idea and there's the Western idea, and now we can compare them. That's to take a step back. That's to stand back from these concepts as if, we're not invested in any of them. We're not involved in any of them, and we just kind of coolly assess them. And what I want to claim is that that's a philosophical stance that does not necessarily match up or do justice to what we see in a lot of African writing. In a lot of African writing, being philosophical means being invested, means being in the world, means being part of a world of decision making, not simply coolly standing back and assessing things and declaring which one is right and which one isn't right. So as you read this introduction that I've given you, I hope you can kind of see that what I'm really suggesting here is a way of doing philosophy that I think is deeply rooted within African thought, but that has something to say to us in the rest of the world about how we actually do this, right? So it's not just about, a bunch of things that people happen to hold, beliefs that people have for whatever reason. It's a different way of thinking. And so please read this. In the discussion area, I am not going to ask you to necessarily react to it, although you can if you want. I'm going to rather ask you to think about this trajectory of the course in general, the overall argument that I'm trying to make and how it fits with an African view of the world. What I want to get into your bones is not just, here are some tidbits that I can bring out at a party to say, oh yeah, here's what Africans think about something. What I'm hoping is that you're going to be able to say, there is a way of thinking that is modeled within African philosophy, maybe not exclusively, but certainly there, that challenges, a lot of things that we thought we knew about philosophy. And if you can go away with something like that, I think this is going to be a more valuable course than just, here are some tidbits, here's some facts, factoids that, we can trot out, Africans think this about that. That's fine and good, but that doesn't take us very far. And that kind of, I think, does a disservice to African thought. So that's been the overall message that I've been trying to get you to throughout this whole course. It's that African thought, yes, has its own integrity, yes, has its own terms of reference and all of those sorts of things, but it also has something to say to the world, and something to say to the philosophical world about doing philosophy itself. So that's what I'm hoping for. I look forward to what you have to say in the discussion area, and I look forward to your papers and the exams next week. I'll talk a little bit more about what you can expect in the exam in another part of this of the course. So you should see something else coming as well on that. All right. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.